It is a great joy to have Pastor Myra Kinds here today, my dear friend, our dear friend and colleague, who is coming all the way from Boston, Massachusetts in the United States from People's Baptist Church. And she is here because we've been doing our Gender Equity and Reconciliation International program downstairs. So a few of you here in the congregation this morning have been going through the process, and Myra is one of our facilitators, and so we've been leading this together. And so we have this great opportunity to this morning to just hear a little bit about Myra's ministry. And I just want to introduce Myra in the sense of how we hold here at Unity the respect, the honor of all the different religious traditions, and that includes the traditions within Christianity, right? So we think about Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and Sikhism, and then sometimes maybe we don't think about within Christianities there are many different aspects of Christianity, just as there are in all the different traditions. I also want to name one of the important places we are always, but definitely at this time in the world, is thinking about the intersectionalities of our lives, whether it be around religion or race or culture or age or all the many things that make us one human family. And so when Myra comes up, you're going to notice that we look different. There's no doubt about that. And if I just looked at Myra and she just looked at me as being different, just as I might look at Jamal, who was here a few weeks ago, who's brown skin, and Jamal is from Bangladesh originally, and he's a Sufi, he's Muslim. And I never got to know him as a friend, then he'd be another. And I'd be another to him, and we'd probably go, well, that's kind of odd, and he's different than me. And I think we all know this, but, you know, when I look at who my friends are in my life, who's in my community, how diverse is it? And that's a very important aspect of my life. And so when we look at the unity symbol out there in the front, and how does that play out in our life here in this room and out in our lives every day? So when Will and I invite our friends and colleagues from the different traditions, different cultures, different races, it's just like Father Thomas Keating. You've heard us speak of him and speak about how he said, it's not enough that we just learn about the other religions. We must love the other religions. And I would expand that to say it's not enough that we just learn about people from other cultures or other races or other ages. We must learn to love our brothers and sisters and people of all different gender identities and expressions and different sexual orientations. We must learn to love them. Otherwise, we're always in the othering, and we aren't unified. We aren't unity. So today, we're going to get to know, we're going to have an engaged conversation up here, a little different than our normal style of being here speaking, and get to know each other. I've been learning about Myra just in the last few days, things I didn't know. And I'll just complete one piece of when I was a little girl. What was the song yesterday? Was that the song that we sang? I'm not sure. It was from the 60s, though, that we opened with this morning. And it took me right back into growing up in the 60s. So I'm a revolutionary baby boomer time, you know. And Martin Luther King Jr. was really important in my life as a teacher. And I was a little girl living in white suburban area. And at one point, it was in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the States. And the United States had the federal regulation to force busing, to integrate. Well, Tulsa decided not to do that. they didn't obey the law. And they got in trouble for it. So a group of parents came together, mine included, and said, we would like to help Tulsa out and volunteer. My parents talked to me and said, would you like to do this? Would you be willing to go to a different school, meet people of different culture and class and age and race? And so I volunteered with a bunch of other white little kids to be bused over to an all-black school. It happened to be the same school my father was raised in as a child and went to school, but the neighborhood had changed. And I got to say, from living in white suburbia, in this all-white neighborhood that was pretty wealthy and my family was middle class, and to be bused across town to this other school, where actually my grandmother lived. She hadn't moved because she was poor. I found my people because my people of the heart. And I was remembering Martin Luther King even when I was working in South Africa. So I went to school for a couple of years in this school before we moved to Dallas. But I remember when I was working as a little girl, let me just back up, as a little girl I held the prayer that the more people that I knew that were different than me, the closer I would be with God. And so that manifests. I didn't do anything. I didn't go out and get a job saying, I'm going to go work in South Africa and India, and I'm going to meet Myra Kinds, and I'm going to meet, other friends who are from different cultures or places in the world. But it manifests in a way. And in South Africa, one time I was looking around in the workshop we were doing, and I realized that there were people of all different genders, all different sexual orientations, all different brown skin, black skin, white skin, and that prayer had come true. So when we talk about we create our reality here at Unity, and I would add, God creates the reality, we're co-creators with God, right? That reality came true to me. So I'm really joyful to invite my friend Myra up here. And she is the pastor and minister of family and youth ministries at People's Baptist Church. Come on up, Myra.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, Myra. Can you all hear me?
No, I'm sorry, Will, I forgot to turn you on.
Okay. So, Myra, maybe you can just begin by just telling us a little bit about your background, your family background, and from where you hail.
So Cynthia mentioned that I come from People's Baptist Church, which is the east coast of the United States. But I was actually born in the southern part, and I'm from Savannah, Georgia, raised in Boston. The church that I attend was established in 1805. It is actually the first African-American Baptist church in Massachusetts. I have been there for over 50 years and have raised my family. I have 4 children. 27, 25, 22, and 16. And I have a husband who's still standing. I also am the very blessed product of a mother who loved her children, and so she raised us alone. I had 5 brothers and no sisters, hence Cynthia is one of my sisters. I know you don't think we look alike, but we really do. And I began doing youth and family ministry 18 years ago. And so though by the age of my children, you have figured out that I'm an old youth pastor.
Yeah. Oh, my wife's working. Okay, thank you. Well, tell us about your youth ministry.
So my youth ministry is all love. Though my church is very traditional, this crazy person that you see on the stage is not very traditional. I do what God tells me to do. And so we are always out in the community doing ministry. I don't know about Vancouver, but typically when you hear youth ministry, you think 12 years old to maybe 24, some will stop at 18. And the first thing that I said to my pastor is, we are going to wait for the kids to turn 12 to tell them that God loves them. So needless to say, we relax the age. And so as long as we're not babysitting on a Friday night, everyone is welcome, up to including the parents. And we have been going strong. We are not a ministry or church inside the walls, but we are a ministry for wherever God sends us.
I'm looking forward to learning from Myra. I've learned a lot from you, and because we are just beginning our youth ministry, for now, because a lot of these people in the audience here were youth in this church, right? Is that right? Yeah, you don't want to admit it, maybe. I know Janet started at 9 years old in this church, so in this center, so yeah. So there's a lot we're learning, Will and I, about bringing youth ministry here.
So, and can you just tell us a couple of stories to give examples of the youth ministry and
So the area that the church sits in is the inner city. And predominantly it's folks with low income, single family headed households, moms in most cases. And though the neighborhood is changing, it's African American, Afro-Caribbean, Latino. That was the primary demographic. And when I first started the ministry, the old model was you minister to the kids inside, you do Sunday school and all of those things. And my thing was, well, what about the kids walking outside? And within the first year, the young people that attended the ministry were actually the kids coming from the neighborhoods. And only to learn, or only to become our biggest marketers of the ministry that we do. So an example, and I'll actually give you two. We had in our ministry a lot of young men that might be considered high risk, gang involved. They didn't have fathers in their lives, but they found this spot at People's Baptist Church and this minister that would hug them. And one time I had a man come into the building and he was like, I'm looking for my nephew. You know, he's a big guy and I'm protecting my kids. I said, well, what is your nephew's name? And so he gave me his nephew's names, the government name, you know. And I said, Scooter? And he goes, he's here? I'm like, Scooter's here every Friday. And then there was all of a sudden knowledge around, there was this space that the young boys were going. Another example is we had one of the young men come in, first visit, we go through the programming, and he says, Mrs. Kinds, I'm coming back every week, but I can't come next week because I got to get my hair braided. So I said, okay, Clark. And the next week after, he did come. And the next month, he brought a sister. And the next month, he brought another sister. And the next month, his mother came. All of them became members of the church. And that was also the case for many of the other children. Unlike when you're in church and you've grown up in it, and your family come, and maybe they do or don't have a commitment, these young people through the youth ministry were bringing family members in and saying, this is the place that you want to come. And so it allows us to minister in the community as well as inside the community of the church, but to also deal with real life issues. Because sometimes we get lost in only thinking about and talking about how great God is, which He is. But the applications and the love that God has in His Word is what we're supposed to share.
I know, Myra, with those youth, they're leaders. They're
Yeah.
ministers themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What kind of, how does that work? Because we have a few youth here that are taking some leadership. They're not here today, but
Yeah.
they're leading and trying to bring some leadership in. So how do you do that with your youth?
So, first of all, everyone has a purpose, and everyone has hands that God can use. So, again, in terms of the lowest age, we probably have 6 years old and up, and we give them opportunity to minister. So one of the things that we do is we reach out to those in transition or those who are homeless. And so while I don't take the six-year-olds out into the common, which is what we call it, they might make sandwiches. And we talk about the fact of how they are helping someone that might be hungry. The other thing that we do in the ministry is that we don't let you go. Once you're a part of Auntie Myra's family, you're always a part. And so for those kids who might get older and graduate, and some don't graduate in the traditional sense, we don't kick them out of the ministry. We give them leadership opportunity. And so we train them. We train them on mental health. We train them on speaking to folks about suicide. We train them on caring for themselves. We even did an etiquette series. And they're like, we're not going to use this. Why are we doing this? But after we finished the etiquette series, we took them to the church's 200th anniversary banquet, where they all, for the first time, were in gowns and tuxedos and too many pictures. But just giving them the experience and the opportunity to know that, yes, and them too, that they can make a difference.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
And I think you were 6 years old, was it? The first time you sang in your church?
Yeah.
Can you just say something about your singing in your ministry and maybe give us a little example?
So my mother and her siblings in the South in the 30s had an a cappella radio station. And as they grew up and some of them moved to the East Coast, they continued to sing. And because I had only brothers, I was always with my mother. And so I was there in the middle of my aunt and uncle, and my mother would be behind me learning all of the songs and became their backup. Well, eventually they pushed me front. And so my first solo at the church was at the age of 6. But I had been singing before them and grew up singing old spirituals and a cappella songs because that's what was in me. And so as a little girl, I sounded like an old woman, belting out gospel, walking around. And if I can think of one.
Before you do that,
Yeah.
because you just shared with me this morning about your babies, and is it Michaela that?
Kayla. So
Kayla, yeah.
4 children, they all sing beautifully. My oldest son is the percussionist for our church. He has been beating on drums since he was 2 years old. So we bought him a real drum set because our pots couldn't take it. The other children are leaders in the choir. My oldest daughter is the director of the choir. And we'll go back to the leadership of the ministry because I do want to say something about my children within the ministry. But they have, even though they're millennials, now learned all of the old gospel songs. So they, at any moment, when they were probably 7, 5, and 3, the oldest 3, I would hear them singing harmony. So it continues. And so, again, in the old Baptist tradition, there's a song that says, I want Jesus to walk with me. And I've actually sung it many times when families have lost loved ones because the mothers especially needed to hear it.
Yeah, you can stand there.
So I'm going to do it in the tradition of the church I grew up in. When I was a little girl,
Yeah.
there was no mic system.
Okay.
All right. trials, please walk with me. In my trials, please walk with me. All along my pilgrim's journey, I want Jesus to walk with me. So the ministry of music for me is the reason that I sit here with you. Because just as much as God has given me comfort and assurance through those words and those songs, every morning when I wake up, He gives me a new song. And it is an important part of the ministry because we all receive and learn in different ways. And so there's a scripture that says there are many parts of the body. And so this body, which is filled with God's love, grace, and music, is what I bring to the table.
That's beautiful, Myra. And can you say a little bit about the gender equity and reconciliation work and how you were drawn to that and how you see that integrating into your ministry?
And before you speak, for those that don't know, because we may have some new visitors or people who haven't heard about this work, this is a work that Will and I co-founded, and it was co-founded 27 years ago. And it's a work that brings people primarily who identify as male and female together, but it is open to people of all gender identities, expressions, and sexual orientations. But bringing women and men together in a safe space, a safe forum, to speak truth about our experiences as women and men. Not with shame and blame, but with the intention for healing, for reconciling, for actually moving from a place of not only equal rights, if you will, in the political mind, socio-political, but to higher reverence of one another and reclaiming that sacred union that has been severed in so many ways in our lives.
So a couple of years ago, I had stepped down from a position of being a director for high-risk youth, working with providers. Out of necessity, I was caring for my second oldest brother, who was a quadriplegic, but he was transitioning. And when I stepped down, I knew that I still had to do work. And I spoke with a faith-based organization. And they said, well, will you take up the position of working with trafficking, human trafficking? And so we had conversations around, in this case, they were focusing on the young women, around human trafficking. And I said, but that's only a symptom. And so I was talking to them in the interview, and they said, well, can you share more about what you're thinking? And because it was faith-based, I said, it's a symptom, but my question is, how do we ensure that our houses of worship are safe spaces for people that are in need? And so they said, will you do a contract with us? So I won't go into the contract work, but during the time that I was doing the consulting, I received an email saying Gender Equity and Reconciliation International was going to have a training. And there were the words that appealed to me, reconciliation and safe spaces. So I said, I'd like to attend. And I did. And on the second day, I was pretty convinced that I was going to become a part of the Jerry family. What I loved about it, and where there was agreement, was one, that there had to be reconciliation. That it wasn't about the bad men or the women who felt like they didn't have power, but it was about the love and the power in all of us. And at the end, there was reconciliation. And I think that, and I know that is the spiritual foundation for who God called us to be. And so it's not about male or female, black or white in terms of who should be in the room, but in fact that we all should be in the room, regardless of our differences, because you find that we have more in common than we have different. And so after that training, I had conversations with these two and wound up being a family member at their home for the next year in 4 modules. And I need to actually correct that. These two and my new little brother in the front, Garrett. And finished my first module back in June of having gone through the gender equity training. And they have been good to keep me busy and invite me out to be a sidekick.
So just part of the family story here too is the first time Myra came to the first training module, our household is vegetarian and vegan, and I think it was your first time going.
It was a learning experience.
She said, yeah. So and actually, I understand, Myra, that you have now gone to Burger King or something and had a Beyond Burger.
I had an impossible Whopper or something. It's not meat, but they did it well enough where they had some grease in it and some seasoning. So.
So everything's possible.
So just, you mentioned that in a couple cases, some of the people in your ministry have been saved by the ministry. There's maybe some, I don't know, a story or two.
So they were saved by God.
Right, understood.
But the ministry was a vehicle for them to understand and learn what other spaces felt like, to know what unconditional love was. And so we have had a number of cases. I can think of a session where we called it Real Talk. And so we had split up the younger kids from the teenagers. And so we probably had about 30 young people in the room where we just wanted to talk about how they felt. I got to say this, bless you. And they began, and again, demographic, this isn't the only picture, but these young people, especially the men, their fathers, most of them were incarcerated, and or they were living off the reputation of their father. And they said in the room that this was the only place that they wanted to be on Friday night, and it was the only place that they could be themselves. And they also said, because my husband, who was sitting in the room with them, said, well, good, bring more. And they said, we're not bringing everybody, because they protected that space. There is no doubt whatsoever that people in the community, young people in the community that felt like they had to make other decisions, were given the word to leave the church and Auntie Myra alone. That was God moving through them, but it also gave them something that they could love and cherish, and they always understood why we were there on the corner. So, there's one thing to do work, but it's another thing to know why you're doing it, right? Because then that enhances what's being done. So we were there because we wanted those kids to know that there is hope, that there are possibilities, that they are somebody, that God loves them. But not only God, the People's Baptist Church loved them too, and that it was possible for change. Though I sit up here, I know a lot of their narratives intimately, But there was a difference for me because my mother put God in our house. Or he was there, but she was very vocal about it when we were babies. And so I was 6 years old having tea parties in the closet with Jesus. And so I share that with the kids. And even though I was raised with a single mom, and there were reasons for that, I met my husband 36 years ago. We have 4 children. We have a totally different life than I had. I've only been in love with my husband. And I can remember sitting with a young person when I was doing the baptismal classes. And he said, and I tell them they can ask me anything. And he goes, Auntie Myra, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. Only Uncle Herman? And I says, only. He's like, Dad, your life is like a fairy tale. And I said, Richie, it says, all lives, all choices are up to you. I said, and it's not a fairy tale, it's real. But just the save your life part was God. You know, I like the miracles course, right? I am a walking miracle, but so are they. And so what we do is we have real talk. We laugh, we cry, we play a lot, but we also help them to see how God is with them every step of the way. And that saves their lives.
Beautiful. So would you be willing to close with a song, one more song that you might?
Lead us back out into that world.
Lead us back out into it. So I will sing a prayer that I often sing when I get up in the morning in pieces. And it's called This Day. Give us this day our daily bread. You said you would supply all our needs according to your riches. I have but to ask, and I shall receive. To go from here and share this love you gave to me, to show someone who's lost and help them find their way, the way to truth